Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some interesting material today. There's a business language lesson focused on bird flu planning.
Right, contingency planning.
Exactly. And also a really detailed text explaining, avian influenza itself.
Yeah, covering the science, the history, the whole picture, really.
So our mission here is pretty clear. Pull together the key info from both. Understand bird flu, its impact health, economic, and how people and businesses are actually preparing.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. What exactly is bird flu?
So, based on the text, bird flu, or avian influenza, it's essentially a disease caused by viruses that mainly infect birds.
Mainly birds, okay.
But, and this is the key part, they can sometimes jump to other animals, including us humans. That's the zoonotic aspect we hear about.
Right. And these viruses, they're not all the same, are they? The text mentioned different types.
Correct. They get classified, often based on proteins. You might hear about H5N1 or H7N9. Those are specific types.
I have, yes.
And they fall into broader categories. There's low pathogenic LPAI, which is usually milder in birds, less risk to us.
Okay.
And then there's highly pathogenic HPAI. Strains like H5N1 and H7N9 often fall here. And these are the ones that can be, well, devastating for poultry and cause serious human illness.
Devastating. Got it. So how does it actually, get around? How does it spread?
Well, among birds, it's often direct contact. Infected birds, their saliva, nasal secretions, droppings. It's quite contagious that way.
Makes sense.
And contaminated environments play a role too, like shared equipment on farms, vehicles, cages. The virus can linger.
Okay.
And then there's the big one, migratory birds, especially waterfowl. They can carry these viruses sometimes without showing any symptoms themselves over really long distances.
Well, like silent carriers moving it across continents.
Exactly, which makes controlling outbreaks incredibly challenging.
Okay, that explains the bird-to-bird spread.
Yeah.
But the crucial question, I suppose, is the jump to humans. How does that happen?
Well, the good news, according to the text, is that bird-to-human spread isn't super common. It's relatively rare.
That is good news.
But it can happen. Usually requires close contact with infected birds, live or dead ones, handling them, being near their droppings or secretions.
So poultry workers, people in live bird markets.
They're at higher risk, definitely. Also, handling contaminated things or preparing infected poultry if it's not done properly.
Right. But the real nightmare scenario, the pandemic potential, that depends on humans spreading it easily to each other, doesn't it?
Precisely. Sustained human-to-human transmission. That's the major worry for health authorities globally. So far, thankfully, that's been limited with these avian strains, but the potential is there.
Okay, so let's say the worst happens and either birds or people get infected. What symptoms should we look out for? What does the text say?
For birds, especially with those highly pathogenic strains, it can be quite dramatic. You might see sudden, unexpected deaths in a flock.
Oh, wow.
Swelling, especially around the head and neck. Birds might lose their appetite, seem lethargic. Nasal discharge, coughing, sneezing, and a big drop in egg production or weird-looking eggs.
A whole range of signs then. And for people.
For humans, it often starts looking a lot like regular seasonal flu.
Oh.
Fever, cough, sore throat, muscle aches, feeling really tired.
So easy to mistake initially.
Very easy. But the danger is it can progress. Difficulty breathing, shortness of breath. That's a serious warning sign. And in severe cases, it can lead to pneumonia, acute respiratory distress syndrome, even multi-organ failure.
That sounds incredibly serious. It really highlights why this isn't just the flu.
Absolutely. It's a different beast, potentially.
To understand the current threat, looking back helps. The informational text mentions some significant past outbreaks. Could you walk us through a few?
Sure. 1997 in Hong Kong is a key one, H5N1. That was really the first time it was confirmed, jumping directly from birds to humans on, well, any scale.
Real wake-up call.
Definitely. It led to killing about 1.5 million chickens to try and stop it. Then 2003-2004 saw H5N1 spread widely across Asia, lots of birds affected, millions called again. And sadly, human cases popped up in Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and other places.
So it wasn't just a one-off.
Not at all. And then in 2013, China had a significant outbreak of a different strain, H7N9.
Right.
This one also caused severe illness in humans and, sparked global concern about its potential to spread.
Right.
And more recently, 2022 into 2023, we saw H5N1 become incredibly widespread globally. Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas. Millions of birds, both wild and domestic, affected. And that naturally ranked up concerns about human exposure again.
These examples really drive home the point. This isn't just a problem for farmers, it's a global health security issue. Why exactly is it considered so dangerous? The text laid out some reasons.
Yeah, several key factors. First, as we touched on, the high mortality rate of some strains. H5N1, for instance, the text mentions a fatality rate over 50% in reported human cases. That's incredibly high.
Staggering, really.
It is. Second, the virus's ability to change. It can mutate, or it could potentially mix genes with human flu viruses if someone got infected with both simultaneously.
Reassortment, is that the term?
That's the one. And if that happens, you could theoretically end up with a virus that has the lethality of the bird strain, but spreads easily between people like seasonal flu. That's the pandemic scenario everyone fears.
Okay, that's sobering.
And thirdly, as we mentioned, migratory birds. They just make containment so much harder because they cross borders, potentially seeding new outbreaks far away.
It feels like a constant battle then. Given these dangers, what can actually be done? The text talked about prevention and management.
Right, and it's sort of a two-pronged approach, protecting birds and protecting people.
Okay, let's start with the birds and farms.
For poultry farms, it really comes down to strict biosecurity. That means things like preventing contact between their flocks and wild birds, keeping things clean, regular disinfection of sheds, equipment, vehicles.
Makes sense.
Vaccination is sometimes used in birds where feasible, though it's not a perfect solution. And crucially, farmers need to monitor their birds closely and report any signs of illness or unusual deaths immediately to authorities. Early detection is key.
Right. And for people, how
Yeah.
do we protect ourselves?
The advice is pretty straightforward, mostly common sense. Avoid direct contact with sick or dead birds, wild or domestic. If you have to handle birds, especially in outbreak areas, use protective gear, gloves, masks.
Okay.
Wash your hands thoroughly and often with soap and water, especially after contact with birds or potentially contaminated environments. Cook poultry meat and eggs thoroughly. Heat kills the virus. And if you develop flu-like symptoms after possible exposure to birds, see a doctor right away and tell them about the exposure.
Good practical advice. But what happens if an outbreak does occur in poultry? What are the immediate actions?
Then it becomes about containment. Authorities will typically impose quarantines, restricting the movement of birds in and around the affected area.
Locking it down.
Essentially, yes. Culling of infected and potentially exposed birds is often necessary, unfortunately, to stamp out the virus source quickly. Public awareness campaigns kick in, informing people about risks and precautions. Surveillance is stepped up, testing wild birds, other farms, and research efforts intensify, looking for better vaccines and antiviral drugs.
A whole coordinated response.
See, it has to be.
Now, this ties perfectly into the other source we had, that language learning audio. It was set in a business meeting, didn't it? Discussing a contingency plan for bird flu.
Exactly. A contingency plan, basically. A backup plan, right? Planning for what if this bird flu situation gets much worse, maybe becomes a pandemic. How does the business cope?
It was fascinating hearing that perspective. It wasn't just about public health. It was about keeping a business running.
Absolutely. The audio really highlighted the practical worries. How do we maintain critical business functions if lots of employees are sick or have to care for sick family?
Yeah, that was a big one.
How do we analyze the financial impact? What's the cost going to be? And how do we protect our employees while they're working? Reducing contact, maybe enabling more work from home.
Yeah.
Which brings in IT challenges.
Right. They talked about IT solutions for remote work and forecasting absences, too.
Yeah, trying to predict how many people might be out so they can plan staffing. And thinking about the impact on clients, on supply chains. It touches everything.
It really showed how interconnected it all is. It's not just an HR issue or an operations issue. It's everything.
Totally. And that meeting scenario underlined how businesses need to think proactively. It's about business continuity.
They even mentioned vaccines for employees, didn't they? That's
Yeah.
something to consider.
They did. Thinking ahead about potentially offering vaccines if and when they become available to protect staff and minimize disruption, it shows that forward planning.
The audio also pulled out some useful vocabulary relevant to both the disease and the business side.
Yeah, words like critical, meaning absolutely essential, outbreak, that sudden rise in cases, forecast, trying to predict what might happen, vaccines, obviously, and pandemic, a disease spreading globally, all terms that bridge health and business planning in this context.
And just on a practical note, it had those useful meeting phrases too.
Oh yeah, things like, let's move to our next order of business, or we need to come up with a clear plan. good standard phrases for managing meetings.
I'd like you to head up this project.
Right, for delegating. Or, I'll leave this to you. Useful stuff for anyone in a work environment, really.
What struck me is how that business meeting conversation mirrored the broader concerns from the informational text. The potential for massive disruption, not just to health systems, but to economies.
Exactly. It drives home that this isn't just a concern for the poultry industry or healthcare. A serious bird flu event could ripple through all sectors. Banks, retail, manufacturing, transport. Everyone needs to consider the potential impact.
So, thinking about the future, what are the big challenges we still face with bird flu, according to the text? And where are efforts focused?
Well, a major challenge is just the virus itself, constantly evolving. New strains keep emerging, which means surveillance has to be constant, and vaccines might need updating.
A moving target.
Very much so. Then there's the need for global cooperation. These viruses don't respect borders, so countries have to share information and coordinate responses. That's not always easy.
Politics can get in the way, I imagine.
Sometimes. Vaccine development itself can be slow, and ensuring equitable access globally is another hurdle. And we can't forget the huge economic impact these outbreaks have, especially on farmers and rural communities.
So, quite a few challenges, but there's ongoing work.
Oh, absolutely. Scientific research is nonstop understanding the virus better, developing faster diagnostics, better vaccines, more effective antiviral drugs. International bodies like the World Health Organization, WHO, and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, play a big role in coordinating global efforts, surveillance, and response guidelines.
And public awareness, I guess, remains crucial.
Vital. Educating people about the risks, how to protect themselves, the importance of reporting sick birds. It's a key part of the defense.
It really is a complex picture, isn't it? From the virus biology to global economics to a single business trying to plan ahead. This deep dive, using both the detailed text and that business scenario, has hopefully pulled those threads together for you, our listener.
Showing how it connects from the micro to the macro level.
Exactly, which leads to maybe a final thought. We've talked a lot about contingency planning for bird flu, a zoonotic disease. Thinking about that interconnectedness, human health, animal health, environmental health, business continuity. What other areas of our complex world might seriously benefit from similar proactive planning? From seeing those connections more clearly before a crisis hits? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.